Thank you. In January of 2009, I took over the helm at New Phoebe House. And for those of you who might not be familiar with New Phoebe House, we're a wonderful place for homeless women and children. And our mothers have all experienced trauma and also have chemical dependence. And they have, for the most part, had their parental rights challenged because of a number of things going on in their lives. And at New Phoebe House, we get them into recover, we help them reunify with their children and gain parenting skills, and then we help them on the other side to move into permanent housing in the community. And I knew the mission was great, but I also knew the organization was in critical condition. I knew that for a couple reasons. Number one, the board president said, it's a real mess. Number two, there hadn't been an executive director in place for 8 months, and one was hired and lasted 3 weeks and ran out running saying this was not going to be good for her health. So I kind of had the scope of what I was going to be up against, and dealing with life-challenging scenarios was not new to me. My early career was as a critical care nurse, working in ER, emergency room, flights, anything really that needed a big turnaround, I was in. So, I had my way to approach New Phoebe House. New Phoebe House is my patient, and I will save it with every intervention known. And so I thought, okay, how do I do this? If this is a patient, I assess and triage. So, airway, breathing, bleeding, circulation. Good. Yes, New Phoebe House had an airway. A few gasps were still happening, but it was bleeding. We had, when I came in, we were $100,000 in the hole to make up for the year, and there hadn't been grants written in months, and so I knew right away that I had to start infusing with IVs money, and so I began the CPR on the organization. To aid in my turnaround efforts, I only had less than a half-time FTE in 2 people. I had a board president who was wonderful, who had been called in just before I got there to help. And there was no line of credit, no assets, no daddy big bucks. And so we were in big trouble. And so as I began to assess and triage almost minute by minute, the next thing I said, okay, I've got to check the organization's vital signs. And that is when I realized I was in the technology void. And I felt like Captain Kirk landing on a planet somewhere that took me from 2009 back to 1995. We had 2 10-year-old computers, a printer that really didn't work. We had DSL line, or it wasn't even called DSL then, something akin to dial-up. Let's just say that. And I had a donor database that was actually on a floppy disk that didn't even go into a computer that I owned. And not to mention that, but QuickBooks, which was the real vital sign that I needed, money every day, was sequestered off-site in a CPA office with a bookkeeper that I did not have access to. The reason was because the board was concerned because a previous organization to New Phoebe House, the executive director had not paid IRS duties and different things, and so they went into this new organization very concerned that that could happen. And besides, if we had it on site, heaven knows that those clients could get into the money. So I was absolutely without one opportunity to see what was going on. So, being the nurse I am, I just went into what are the cures? What are the medicines I can throw at this? What interventions can I take? So the first thing I did, as any resourceful person, I brought my own laptop and my own printer. Amen, got that. Then MDC was getting rid of all of their computers because they were so outdated. And, I said, hi, how about 4 of those and a little tiny server? And they said yes, and they came and set them up for us. And so we were in business. And, oh, by the way, the staff was still doing handwritten progress notes, and all of our data collection was being hand done with, hash marks and all of that too. So the next thing I had to do was figure out how to get some more of these systems. So I looked online and got Salesforce free to an organization our size. But of course, who could input in Salesforce? Thank God, my new son-in-law, had just moved here from Denmark and didn't have his work visa yet and needed something to do. So I grabbed him into service, and again, being resourceful. And then I also learned about Wix.com. Do any of you know about Wix.com? We had a 2002 vintage website, and I knew that if I was going to be doing any branding, rebranding, promoting, money type things, asking online, I was going to have to make a website. I did not know one thing about HTML. But at home at night with my husband, while he's watching TV, I get on Wix.com, and you can make a free website on Wix.com. And so I made it. And that was in, 2009, maybe early 2010. And it's still beautiful today. If you get a chance, go to look at it. Except now, we're not mobile friendly. So Wix.com will be there for us again. Then we started moving piece by piece. When I got at TechSoup, I found that you could get all sorts of software for very inexpensive prices for nonprofits. And if you haven't ever gone to TechSoup, it's a lifesaver. You can get Office for $31. You can get the QuickBooks new every year, all of those things. And I had not a budget, zero. So it was very helpful, because when we all got outfitted with Office, and I then had Excel and PowerPoint and all the things that everyone takes for granted, I started a charting system with PowerPoint. And it was better than handwriting. I didn't have time to create an elaborate case management charting system, so I just set it up so the staff could chart on it and click and copy a slide and go into the next one, and it worked as our charting system for a number of years. So each of these little innovations, oh, and I'll tell you about squirrel mail, but that's coming later. So I'm making all these advances, but I'm still seriously doing CPR on the organization. And the turnaround was happening very quickly inside the organization, because I knew about mental health and chemical dependency and all the things our women needed. I could start those more clinical pieces changing very rapidly. But every year I cut the deficit in half, even though we were increasing the budget. And when I say I'll say collectively, we, all of the people involved at New Phoebe House, although 99.9% of the fundraising was done by me. But in 2011, the board was ready to quit doing CPR and stop the resuscitation. We had a closure plan. We had press releases ready. We had written out information that we were going to give to the residents. And the main reason the board wanted to stop is because they didn't feel they were being fair to the employees, meaning myself and our bookkeeper, because she was volunteering and I was not getting paid in a timely manner. In fact, payday loans was my best friend. But I'm sitting there and I'm going, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I'm seeing signs of life. Things are happening. You know, we're making some changes here. It's chugging along. And wait a minute. No, I'm older. I'm stubborn. I've done turnarounds forever. And no, we're not going to give up now. And one of the main reasons was, aside from my ego, was I knew how important this mission was. And many of my staff members had actually graduated from our program and were excellent examples of why we are doing this. And they were bonded with me, and they were ready to keep fighting. And so I did have to plead a bit, but it worked long enough that all of a sudden, New Phoebe House was off the critical list. And 2011 was the last time we ever talked about closing the organization. Things started happening quickly then. All of a sudden, we had money to get new computers, and we had servers and modems and all sorts of things, but we still didn't have someone who could really help us with the technology. And all of a sudden, Hilltop Artists said, we're going to get a Vista volunteer, and we're wondering if you would like to share her, and she really loves computers. I said, yes, of course, even though it was only $2,000 we were sharing, but that turned our world upside down. Suddenly we had shared files, and we had Excel spreadsheets that actually calculated themselves. And my Facebook that I created for New Phoebe House was linked with PayPal, and now we have Click and Pledge even. And so the minute Jillian, our Vista volunteer, came on board, things really started clicking along. And that made such a difference because, you know, we are a people business who needs to be supported by computers. And suddenly we had someone whose computers were her business, and she was going to help us. Made a huge change for us. So first I was triaging, and then we got to process improvement. So she'd say, why is it like this? And I'd go, you should have seen it before. And so she helped us start, you know, making a lot of technological advances. And in 2013, we turned the corner. I forgot to mention that one of the board members happened to be a bookkeeper. And so I made a pact with her almost the first week in the job that I wanted her to come to work for me, and we were going to get the QuickBooks on site. And that did happen, but it took me almost a year to talk the board into that. So then I had my vital signs, I had QuickBooks, I had outcomes, I had all of those things. In 2014, we bought the house that we now own. We had a line of credit. In 2015, we not only have our house, but we rented the house next to us for corporate offices, because by now 9 of us were working in a room that was 40 by 40 or less. It was a little tight. By 2016, we are talking about expansion and a new building project. And we've grown the organization from 186,000 to over 660,000 in that time frame. When we moved from our little office, imagine all of these people working in one little room. Then I moved next door. We also needed some new technology, because now I wasn't hearing everything every day. I wasn't in the know. I didn't know what was getting done. And so we found another free program called Asana, for any of you who haven't tried that yet. It's a wonderful assigning task and finding out what's getting done and what isn't getting done. So now we have 14 strong board members, 10 employees, and a very positive bottom line, and we're moving forward. So you can come from the technology void into this century without any money. That's what I had to do, and we did it. So the things I learned were, in a crisis situation, you do not have time to make a well-being plan for technology for the next 10 years. You need something right then for what you need to get done right at that moment for the right price, which is zero. And you can find a lot of resources online and from other nonprofits. 2 nonprofits help me with technology along the way. The second thing is, if you get a chance to have someone who can be more devoted to IT, even if it's part-time, it will make advances happen very quickly. Jillian, in 2013, she had to talk me out of squirrel mail. Now, squirrel mail, as you can well imagine, was a very antique system of email. And I resisted it like crazy, because that was the only one thing that was working when I came. And she said, oh no, we're gonna go to Google Mail and it's gonna be great. And I'm going, but it works. She talked me into it, we did it. Now most of our technological and shared files is on Google Drive, and it's so old executive directors can learn new tricks, is another thing that you learn. And you can also make a website without HTML. And a team bonded in battle is formidable. Thanks.